my honest anticipation, what I expect will happen is that China will make a legal move on Taiwan. What China did in Hong Kong was legal first. They changed the laws in Hong Kong. They changed the laws in China, which then changed the laws in Hong Kong, which made it legal for them to go in and take Hong Kong by force. In 2019, right before COVID hit, the whole world watched, and it happened. And the whole world complained and threw a fit and leveraged sanctions and said it was unfair and unjust and everything else. And then the Chinese did it anyways. And now here it is 2023, and most people don't even remember what happened in Hong Kong just 4 years ago. Now they're watching what's happening in Ukraine. Now in Ukraine, some people say that what happened in Ukraine is that the world rallied behind Ukraine by giving them weapons and giving them training and giving them resources. The most limited resource in Ukraine is Ukrainian soldiers. It's not tanks or guns or howitzers. The thing that will run out first is Ukrainian fighters. That's like, it's a shame to me to watch what's happening because the Ukrainian fighting force is putting up such a valiant fight. They're doing everything they possibly can to equip every warfighter to be worth 10, 20, 30, 50 Russian fighters, right? But that's their most limited resource. They're not going to be able to create more Russian fighters in the next 3 to 5 years. You just can't turn a 5-year-old into an 18-year-old. So that's the resource. That's the clock that Zelensky knows he's fighting against, that he's racing against, is not a clock of fighter jets or missile defense systems. It's how am I going to find enough fighters? And NATO and the West know that they don't want to put their boots in Ukraine fighting the Russians, because that's all it would take for the Russians to basically say, hey, NATO allies are killing Russians, so now Russia can kill NATO allies. And because Russia is a nuclear power, they essentially have the same the same trump card that we had in World War II. So nobody in NATO wants to mess with that trump card, because when you have an animal cornered, it does amazing things, right? So what I see happening is China will make a legal move on Taiwan.
What legal play do they have with Taiwan, though?
They have a number of legal plays. First of all, do you know what the official American stance is on Taiwan?
It's something like we're not going to do anything, but don't touch them. It's so bizarrely vague.
Yeah, it's called the One China, Two Systems policy. Essentially, in the eyes of American policy, Taiwan already belongs to China.
Interesting.
So then China also has acknowledged with Taiwan, you have your own system, but you're still part of the mother country.
This is Hong Kong 2.0.
Hong Kong 2.0. And over the stretch of 80 miles from coast to coast between southeastern China and Taiwan. So it's sticky, man. If China makes a legislative move that basically forces the Taiwanese system to then say, you are now communist, right? They could have the legal foundation to do that. And then a legal attack is very similar to what they did in Hong Kong. That goes to court systems. That doesn't go to bullets, right? And then when the legal system starts to go in their best interest or in their favor, now China has legal grounds to basically have Chinese police officers enforce Chinese law inside Taiwan. This whole process, what the hell is the United States going to do? There's no missiles, there's no guns. You can drive through the straits all you want. It's a legal issue. It's not a military issue. So I anticipate China making a legal move on Taiwan that will be supported by key members in the UN. Why? Because how many of the BRICS are in the leading countries in the UN? All of them, right? If you look at the Ukrainian conflict now, the news media oversimplifies everything. So media says that the UN passes resolutions that condemn Russia. That's true. And the UN passes resolutions with a large majority. 140 countries condemn Russia. That is also true. What they're not telling you is that the countries who are not condemning Russia are the largest, wealthiest countries in the UN. China is not condemning Russia. South Africa is not condemning Russia. India is not condemning Russia, right? Even inside NATO, you have Belgium and Hungary who are not condemning Russia.
Really?
So even NATO is not unified on this.
Whoa.
Right? China's seeing all of this, and China's seeing it for what it really is, not for what American media is telling the American people it is. And the American media isn't, they're not trying to lead us astray. They're just trying to run a business. They're trying to get people to read their newspaper, click their links, see their ads, so that they can pay their employees the next pay cycle. It's all the media is trying to do. They're not trying to lead us down the wrong path. So once there's an administrative takeover in Taiwan, China has all the rules all the cover it needs to basically start shipping National Guard troops, police officers, even military units over to Taiwan. And now Taiwan belongs to China in a bloodless war, very similar to the bloodless coups that we've seen multiple times in places like Thailand or all over Southeast Asia, right? That's how I see it happening. And I see it largely happening in the lead up to the 2024 election, because China is going to benefit from a very confused American base.
Will be peak division.
During peak division and electoral cycle.
Wow. That's so distressing because that feels very plausible. Okay, so we have a lot of business interests there. So what will our reaction be? Because my first thought was our reaction will be, oh, maybe that's the best way for this to happen. We can be like, we don't have to go and commit our American lives to it. They did it just like just like Hong Kong, where we'll, rant and rave and say this is a problem and how dare you and sanctions.
Yep.
But ultimately be glad that we're not sending people to die. But do we have enough business interests there that, especially in sensitive areas like chip manufacturing, where we can't let it go?
Our business interests with China are significantly bigger than our business interests with Taiwan.
Wow.
Taiwan has the market cornered on semiconductors, but that's not just for the United States. They have the market. They have like 98% of the market share in semiconductor manufacturing. Who designs the semiconductors? We do. We have all the IP. They just have the plants. That's why one of the big initiatives in Biden's CHIP Act is to actually bring TSMC, I forget the name of the country, or I forget the name of the company, the main manufacturer in Taiwan, to actually bring them to the United States. So they're trying to build manufacturing plants for the Taiwanese company here in the flyover states in the United States, so that we can just bring that tool.
God, this is going to be a fascinating
stateside
10 to 20 year period.
Absolutely. You just nailed it right there. It is going to be a fascinating decade to 2 decades in the future. So that's what I want to focus on. That's what I encourage my clients to focus on. It's not about what happens now or in the next 2 years. It's about what are you going to do so that your family, your business, your financial legacy, your individual legacy is safeguarded for what the world could look like 10 to 20 years from now. The world could look like the United States is still the economic and military superpower. It could look like that. So you may not have to change much. But according to economists, by 2033, China will be the economic superpower. That's not far away.
If we print money like crazy, then we could not go to zero, but like every other superpower before us, you really get knocked for 6. It is not a minor thing that happens.
Right.
And then you lose your ability to print your way out of things, which then you go into austerity. Now you look like England post-World War II, which, hey, England's amazing, but they definitely had some rough years, and they're certainly not the global superpower that we are now. But I've sort of always imagined us falling into the number 2 position, where we still maintain some real might, that we have massive influence in other parts of the world, that there will almost certainly be parts like Europe, and look, they're an economic mess, but parts like Europe that are going to be far more aligned, most likely, certainly culturally, with America than they would be with China. And so you get sort of a more like Cold War-y vibe, where Russia was a huge player. For anybody that's too young to remember, Russia was a beast when I was a kid. Now, we didn't know that it was a bit of a paper tiger, but like they really, they mattered on the global stage, and I imagine will still matter.
I think you're asking yourself the right questions, right? Knowing that humans are laughably predictable, if China becomes the next global superpower, what is the laughably predictable thing that would happen next, right? The most predictable outcome is that China would take the number 1 spot. We would fall to the number 2 spot. Who's always everyone's target? The guy in the lead. So right now, the world is unified that the United States is enemy number 1. Even if there are allies, we're still enemy number one. You think NATO likes the United States? No. France and Germany have both come out to say that they don't want the United States in NATO anymore.
What?
Absolutely. The Chancellor of Germany has said he wants Germany to have the largest army in Europe, specifically so that they can't be bossed around anymore by the United States because everybody's overdependent on the United States military. Right? The president of France, early in the invasion with Ukraine, shut Biden down and said, you are exacerbating this conflict with the rhetoric that you're spitting in Poland and the United States, when you don't even have, the United States isn't even within the firing range of Russia. Right? So France and Germany have had something to say. Biden has been so successful with his policy in Poland because Poland has long had history against Russia. So it's a natural way in. Poland already hates Russia, and Poland will take any help it can get from anybody in NATO. And so the United States comes in and says, hey, we'll help you, Poland. We'll back you up, and Poland backs the United States up. But Canada and France and Russia and Germany and the UK, they have a very different story there.
Whoa. We have to talk about France. So I was scandalized in my research to hear you say that when you think about like the most hardcore intelligence agencies, that France of all places is like brutal. The DGSE,
yep.
What's their shtick? Why France?
So there's a couple reasons why France. So one of the biggest reasons why France is because in the late 90s, the United States CIA was caught spying on the French government. Just like in the early 2010s, we were caught spying on the German government, right? Unlike Germany, France holds a grudge. So
is France not spying on us?
Of course they are.
Yeah,
of course they are.
So, but it's like we got caught, and so now they get to be mad?
No, it's more like something changed. Prior to the 90s, prior to the late 90s, France wasn't so interested in the United States. They were interested in more direct threats to France. Well, now in the late 90s, there's this giant flap inside France, and now France is like, fuck the Americans, right? So they start to dedicate resources to building up an intelligence service and a skill set that makes sure that they will never be penetrated by the Americans again, right? The DGSE becomes one of the, and still remains, one of the best funded, most technically capable intelligence services in the world. Why does France have enough money to put all of their resources into their intelligence operations? Because guess what they don't have to worry about? Military industrial complex, because they're part of NATO, and the United States wants to keep sending weapons and troops into the European countries. So the United States has basically bought its influence in NATO by forcing Europe to prioritize, or giving Europe the opportunity to prioritize their economic growth in other avenues besides military industrial development. That's why most of the militaries in Europe are very weak and very small. Now, there are some that are modernized, which is why everybody's so excited about Sweden and Finland coming into NATO. But most other countries are outdated and underfunded. And they don't need to be funded, because if something happens in Poland, Article 5 of the NATO alliance means that the United States military is going to come save the day. So they're okay with that. And of course, the United States is okay with that too, because it means there's never going to be a military competitor in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. As a result, what does get to happen is those countries can take all the money that they would spend on military defense and channel it into intelligence operations. Now, when they channel it into intelligence operations against China, North Korea, Iran, terrorism, they share that information back and forth with the United States selectively, and they build that alliance. But they also spend those resources spying against the United States.
That's so funny.
And because France specifically is so well funded and holds a grudge and is so adept specifically at targeting Americans, they have made a huge impact in the space of economic and industrial espionage against the United States. There are, if you talk to an intelligence professional, like I'm sure you have friends in your network, and you're like, hey, is France really that big a deal? You will hear the same thing over and over again. Fuck France.
Wow.
You will hear those two words from every intelligence professional out there, because we have all been bested at some point in time by the DGSE. They either stumbled into one of our cases, they false flagged and pretended to be CIA and recruited an asset from underneath us, or who knows what, right? But they know how to target Americans.
Whoa.
And nobody knows they even exist. It's the perfect kind of clandestine operation. Nobody even knows the threat is there.
The way that information warfare works, leveraging the human animal against itself, I am waking up to a reality that I've been so focused in my life on my businesses and my loves and passions and my wife, oh my God, that I'm totally blind to all this. And that I have an outdated vision. Like I think of France from the 80s and 90s when I was a kid, and like
we all made fun of them. They put their hands up.
Exactly.
They don't even fight back.
100%.
Yeah.
And so my vision, I'm sure, on a lot of these countries is really skewed in terms of what they actually think about us. Because I remember there was a lot of that grumbling when the World Trade Center first, not 9/11, but in the 90s.
Yeah.
When they first bombed it, where it was like, there are people in the world that hate Americans. I was like, say what? Like I had completely, my own sort of insulated vision of America and just we export culture and America's so great. And
who wouldn't love democracy?
That was the first time where I was like, whoa, wait a second. Like people don't actually want this. And that is, so in recent years, I've been reading a lot about totalitarian states, communism, and like what that really looks like in practice. And it gets real scary real fast. And so looking at Mao's China, which is like anybody that wants to have their brain absolutely melted, there are 3 books that I recommend that you read where you can see just how terrifying humans can be. And that is Mao, The Unknown Story, The Untold Story. I can never remember the exact, but the Gulag Archipelago, about the Gulag system in Russia, and then The Red Famine, which is about the Ukrainian famine. Those 3 books will show you that the depths of human evil. Like, I don't know how to, like it, that's really, really unbelievable. Like what went down. And then when I was thinking about China, and it's like, but ultimately, like that is born of the people. Yeah. Like that is the natural outcropping. Now look, it may come and go, and maybe it's just born of the people right now in this moment, and maybe that won't last, but like it is the system that they don't overthrow. That would be the right way to say it, because they could at any moment. Like if the people really don't want it, they could overthrow it, and they don't. And so that was the eye-opening where I was like, oh wow, like the rest of the world does not think of democracy, just to keep it simple, the way that I do. Yeah. And honestly, now I'm beginning to wonder if even kids growing up now think of democracy the way that I do. And if demographics are destiny, I get a little unnerved because I am in the process of formulating my opinion about this. So a lot of what I have is emotion. So going back to your early things, that we are emotional creatures and the way that we feel determines what we see. A lot of the emotion that I have not solidified into an updated worldview is I'm very unnerved by the amount of division in the country. And I don't see, knowing what I know about humans, I don't see how we get back on to coming together without massive suffering. Now, with enough suffering, we will, but I don't see how we'll come back together without just a tremendous amount of suffering.
I wish I could disagree with you, but I agree with you. Not only would it take a tremendous amount of suffering for us to reunite, but our biggest threats right now are also aware that as long as we don't suffer, we're not really going to unite. So they can just execute, as long as they can execute cleanly on a consistent vision, they will. Because you know what we cannot do? We cannot execute cleanly on a consistent vision. Yeah. And I believe in the American experiment, and I believe that the world is safer with the United States being the global superpower. But I also think that the world hasn't come to that conclusion on its own. So maybe what we need is a different global superpower for a while before the world is like, you know what? Maybe we don't like this, right? Maybe we want to return to another system.
God, I hope it doesn't come to that.
I hope it doesn't come to that either, because you and I won't be here for that. My kids will be. right? My grandkids will be the ones going through that transition. And that's not going to be a pretty transition. And who knows? It's the thing is that, again, knowing how people work, we are hardwired. Human beings are wired to survive. We are not wired to thrive. We are wired to survive.
Ouch. Yeah.
The human brain, the processing that goes between the amygdala and the sensory cortex and all the different parts of your left and right brain that help you reach conclusions, they were all built and they have all evolved around the idea of individual survival. So whatever happens, human beings will survive, will adapt, and will survive. We might suffer along the way, but Buddhism says suffering is part of the experience, right? So to avoid suffering is almost contrary to the faith-based, the dominant faith-based religions in the world, right? Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, they all agree suffering is unavoidable. But human beings still find a way to persevere. I would love to not have that happen, but if I was in charge of any country that didn't want the United States to be the new global superpower, I would just let the United States continue to pick at its toenails like it does right now, right? We're the fat dude in the corner picking at our hangnail while the rest of the world is working out, exercising, getting smart, and getting ready to go to war, right?